milestone.
What is a milestone, by the way? Is it literally a milestone?
Yeah.
I mean, like they put like a stone in the ground.
When people go on long walks and stuff like that, and there's a stone every time you've walked another mile, so you can figure out how much further you need to go until you get to your destination.
Yeah.
A medieval inn or some such.
That's what making albums is like. It's
Yeah.
like putting a big piece of stone in the ground somewhere over there, and then you walk towards it.
Yeah.
And then when you get there, the album's done. Well, it's our fourth studio album.
Every album should have importance, that's the thing, but there is indeed something special about the new album, about the You Know What album. It's like, we're a pretty, we're our worst critics, it's at shows, I always say to people when they go like, hey, it was a great show, I say like, well, maybe every 8th or 10th gig, we all three go off stage and think like, hey, that was all good. Not that we find it generally bad, but this is one of those albums where we all kind of came out of the studio even during the recording and thought like, hey, everything came together really, really well. The sound, the songs, the environment. So there is something cool about that album. Yeah.
I think we all name the tracks. I think we all each have different methods for naming the tracks. In my case, I think of the name of the track first and then write the music. So it's easier for me to understand what the music should feel like emotionally in telling a musical story. So I have this little guide, that's the title. But that's the way that I do it. I think these guys do it differently.
Yeah, I would normally start with some kind of mood or vibe, which I want to capture. And then that vibe requires a piece of music and it requires a name. So the music and the title kind of come from the same root inspiration.
Yeah, it's with me a little bit of both. When I would go into details, let's stick with the new album. When we all come together, that song, I literally had like the words in my head for that song and was singing them. And then I made it an instrumental song. For Burial at Sea, I also had the title first and wrote the music after that to catch the whole mood about it. And then the other song that was mine was Spiritus Cactus. And I just found the title so fucking funny. That didn't have anything to do with the song.
I'm not sure it's that unusual for music to be instrumental. I'd say classical composers have been doing that and getting away with it unchallenged for centuries. I think there's something different if you have electricity and long hair and people say, oh, you look like a rock band, where's your singer? Why should it be like that? Some music needs vocals to convey its message and some doesn't. From Turkey.
Yes, exactly.
That's true.
Yeah, we were this is a long time ago, but we were walking from our hotel to go to the Central Market in Istanbul, and we saw on the street there was someone was selling these rubber chickens that if you squeeze them they make the noise, and we each got one, and we because we're all actually 4 years old at heart, we just walked around Istanbul just going wah, 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 for an hour. And once we got on stage, we realized that we couldn't stop, and so we started doing it there. And then next thing you know, there were pigs in an Italian gas station, and next thing you know, it's on the DVD. And
meanwhile,
now
people
in the artwork.
bring us chickens and pigs and things.
So the artwork motif is just a fun way to reflect the fact that we're trying not to take this too seriously, I think, in the end.
I'm also slightly reminded of the painter Lowry, who did all these kind of urban, industrial-looking scenes from northern England. And if you look carefully, there's always a cat somewhere in each picture.
And was this in your last visit in 2015? Chicken.
When we picked up the chicken?
Yeah.
That was way
12.
back. That must have been like a Culture Clash era.
No, it was before, because
Even
it's
before,
on the
huh?
Boing Will Do a Live DVD.
True.
So it was on the very first European tour,
Yeah.
early 2012 or something like that.
Yeah.
Spring 2012.
I'll never forget that the guy who guided us on the marketplace in Istanbul, he was offering us something nice. He goes like, hey, you know what? You're our guest here and stuff like that, and pick anything you like. and I'll buy you that, to take home. Maybe like, a nice teacup or a nice, like one of those specialties. And I remember seeing those chickens and we all looked over and it was like, oh, please. And I remember when he said like, what, the chicken? In a way, this person is responsible for that.
Yeah. We all write individually on our own in our homes.
Yeah.
We make the demos complete, and then we did get together and rehearse in the studio. We had 3 days, right?
We did.
Yeah. So, like normal band, I think.
Well, but we know each other for such a long time, so we already know how we tick, sort of. It's not that we kind of get together and are like, a fresh band who kind of needs to find their way. So that's why that works. We know already how to interpret songs, and then we go into the studio and lock them in. Yeah, that's all.
I'm always the last guy to submit 3 songs for the album. So I seem to thrive on that panic factor and knowing that there's a deadline. But for me, it's just really sitting there with a computer. I have a guitar, I have a bass, and I have something where I can program drums, and I just kind of switch between them.
Yeah, it's kind of the same here. I mean, I'll always, if I know that I'll always start with programming drums. I love programming drums. It's super fun. I wish I was a drummer. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a drummer, and then my parents said, no, we don't want drums in the house. So I played bass and piano instead. So I start with programming the drums, and then it's either bass or guitar. Bass always goes really fast. Guitar always takes forever because I'm a horrible guitarist. But somehow the demo gets made, and then I hand it over to these guys, and then it turns into a real song.
Yeah. Well, when I just write songs, I sometimes just write a bunch of songs. That's what I usually do. Some end up on my solo albums, some end up for the band, and I always pick then, which song is really good for what. On the last album, though, I really kind of wrote specifically, for this particular adventure. And I always have a guitar with me on the road. I have a keyboard with me on the road, and my music software. When you go to my hotel room right now, it's like you see the Apollo setup, and all this kind of stuff. So if an idea hits, I just go for it. It belongs to my everyday life, and I love writing.
No.
It's the one thing that stayed the same. I think somehow we figured out how we would have to approach things to be a band when we live in different time zones. And it's the same basic approach that we had when we made our first record. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, as they say.
Well, we've played hundreds of concerts. That's a big change. So, there's a way that we know each other musically and personally that only comes from playing hundreds of concerts. So when we sit down to write music, we have the knowledge of those hundreds of concerts in our head, and we know, if I'm programming a drum part, I'm like, this is Marco, dig into this, and I try and write something on the guitar that Guthrie will be able to dig into, and we're not just making it up and hoping for the best like we were on the first album. Now we go, oh, okay, we know that this is going to work, and have some more fun with it because of the familiarity.
Yeah, the one thing that never changes, though, speaking from my end right now, is that when you provide the songs to each band member, you obviously want them to like the song. That's always like a cool thing, because if you kind of, cook a meal, you want people to, to enjoy it. So that will never go away, and I guess that's also like, always a little bit of a challenge, but a fun challenge to make ourselves happy there with it, I guess.
No, yes. But again, that kind of comes back to the way that we write. I think Marco is different than us because Marco is constantly writing. You see these musicians sometimes. Mike Keneally's another example. I think probably Devin Townsend is another example. Just music, they have to write music or else, life is not going to be okay. Hang
on, life is not okay even with the music.
Yeah. For Guthrie and I think it's a bit more of we have to have a certain set of surroundings and kind of a purpose, and then we're gonna do this. I mean, I have written on demand in a hotel room before, but it's not my favorite way to write.
Yeah, I can't travel with enough stuff the way I would like to, which is constantly hopping between guitar and bass.
Well, I should start with influences. Well, strangely enough, I'm the guy who gets booked for a lot of prog gigs, and I was never a prog fan. Even though I have to kind of, sort of revise that. So the thing is, I do like some prog bands, but my prog bands I grew up with were like maybe Jethro Tull. Other than that, I grew up with Queen, with Led Zeppelin, The Police, Frank Zappa, Judas Priest, Kate Bush, and many, many more. But those are the first ones that I just blabbered out. So, anyways.
Yeah, I basically grew up on my parents' record collection, which was a lot of 50s and 60s stuff. Lots of Elvis and Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis and that kind of stuff. And then Hendrix, Cream, Dylan, Leonard Cohen. What you would expect to find in the record collection of someone from that generation. So there wasn't a whole lot of prog in my world growing up. I did hear a little bit of Jethro Tull and thought that was pretty awesome.
I guess then I'm the guy in the band who was like the big prog guy really growing up. I was, not every single prog band. I like the King Crimson stuff. I like some of the Genesis stuff. I like some of the Jethro Tull stuff, but there were two big, and Rush too. I have a few Rush albums, but the big two prog bands for me were Yes and Pink Floyd. And I went completely all the way into pretty much every Yes album from 1968 to 1978. So I'm really, really big on that. The Pink Floyd albums of the 70s, the 5 big ones, Metal, Dark Side, Wish You Were Here, Animals, The Wall, they're huge albums for me. And that's in addition to the other rock influences, some of which he mentioned, Led Zeppelin and Frank Zappa, and I was also big into metal, Metallica and Judas Priest and stuff like that. But I've always been a big progressive guy at heart, and it's like writing for the Aristocrats. This isn't a progressive band, really. You know what I mean? We have some structure, so that we're not like just a jazz band where we're just writing the head and then we solo for 10 minutes and we come back to the head. So there's form, and in that way it's extended form, and that is prog. But some of the progressive stuff that I think we all know means large instrumentations, large orchestrations, and if we want to get our rocks off, we can do that on our solo albums. Like, he'll do solo albums, I'll have lots of layers, and I have a new solo album that's specifically a progressive album. So it's like there's ways to do that, but in terms of how we relate to the progressive community, it's always been kind of a funny thing, because progressive fans seem to enjoy what we do, even without us being overtly progressive. There's some progressive stuff in there, but there's a lot of other stuff also.
But it surprises me also, what is really progressive now that Bryan just said, like out loud, Pink Floyd and Rush. I like Pink Floyd and Rush too, but I never considered them as being a progressive band. But progressive was for me always like these pompous kind of bands, who have like
the capes.
Those wearing the capes and have Roger Dean artwork. And
Yes is like this is like the Spinal Tap of progressive bands. But there's a reason, because they kind of like they one band has to be the archetype, right? So that's what it is.
And they're great, they're great, obviously, Gentle Giant is great.
Yeah, that's another.
You mentioned Gentle Giant, that was great. But it's also, they probably saw themselves as kind of a neoclassical avant-garde.
I don't think they had a problem with the prog label.
Probably not.
Pink Floyd is the weird one in terms of are they prog? Because they kind of went in this. There's something else in addition to being prog, and there's a reason why they sold 100 million records, right? Somehow they managed to do something bigger than that, which is pretty cool.
I remember some people tried to make the case that when Radiohead came out with Paranoid Android, that was prog.
Just because the second song was
I'm
in
sure
7?
they would have hated it.
I know, right?
But if you listen to Kid A, that could totally count as a prog album.
Well,
even Nine Inch Nails could count as a prog
absolutely.
album.
If you deconstruct what they're doing, it's layered progressive stuff with an 80s pop element. So prog is a big broad label. And the nice thing about it now is that I think there was a time where if you said something was prog, everybody'd be like, that's not cool. And now it's like, prog is cool.
Yeah.
Like everybody's into it,
That's true, yeah.
No prog shaming. Well, why don't we do this? Instead of you asking us about it, it would be interesting for us to know what you consider a modern prog
Yeah,
band?
who's a modern prog band?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And not trying to put you on the spot, but this is really, I think we might be older than you. So it would be easier for you to tell us, like, what's, the scene right now. Who would you consider, like, your favorite 5 bands?
Probably like, the new metal things more.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what you guys say.
Like, there are lots of progressive metal bands that came up from the northern part of Europe.
Like, what name a band?
Like Soen.
Soen.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of them. Yeah.
Anagram of nose.
Yes. Again, this means no disrespect at all. When you're traveling and you're a professional musician, it is very easy to kind of get locked into your own scene. So we don't want to mean any disrespect to them at all. It's just that we just don't know.
That's the thing. May I add? When people ask me on music festivals, about favorite drummers or favorite bands, most of the time I have no idea, who they are, because when we write a lot of music and we play music, the last thing you want to do is listen to other people's music sometimes.
Yeah, you have to save space.
Yeah, you have to, otherwise, because we do this so many times, but that doesn't mean that we're not welcoming it. If something hits me, if I hear something in a record store or I pick something up that is really cool, then I'll buy the album, obviously,
Yeah, a similar account from me. When I want to listen to music purely for recreational purposes, I don't necessarily want the music I'm hearing to remind me of work. So I'll tend to gravitate towards things that don't have regular drum kits or don't have electric guitars. So it's more of an escape.
Same thing.
Let me ask you this. Do you consider Haken to be modern progressive?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. Well, there's
waiting for that name.
Yeah, because they're good. Exactly. And we know that they're right now they're on tour with Devin Townsend in Europe. So we're kind of crisscrossing the continent with them at the same time. Yeah, there's an example. Those guys are really good. I know they're very popular.
And except for that, Steven Wilson is, of course, I think one of the best modern progressive.
Obviously honoring the progressive tradition with what he does.
I dare you to tell him that. I don't think Stephen enjoys the prog label.
But that's so because he's obviously listened to all that stuff his whole life.
Yeah.
It's just so obvious that he's a big fan of Yes. He did the Yes remixes and Genesis.
And he likes Greta Van Fleet a lot.
Beer.
Hiking. I love hiking in the mountains.
Hiking on tour with Devin Townsend. I like ping pong. I like playing ping pong.
Yeah, that's good.
And good food, good restaurants.
So you must be really enjoying the tour in Europe. Right?
What was that again?
You must be really enjoying the tour in Europe right now.
In fact, that was a pretty good restaurant with an own brewery. You missed out. No. But there's still tonight.
It's still Germany.
But still Germany.
Yes, we're having lots of meat and lots of beer because we are in Germany, and that's what we do here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, we're a quintet. We have like the pig and the chicken with us.
Yeah, and they get all the money too. We have to pay them a lot to be on the road with us. They don't come for free.
It's a trio because there are 3 of us. And with that comes a certain freedom, I think. When we're playing live, there's more scope for kind of being exploratory, being loose and like surprising each other. And it's possible to be in a trio and be constantly aware of what the other 2 guys are doing and what they're thinking. And with a larger lineup, you have to kind of choose on whom to focus a little bit more. So there's something about a triangle where everyone feels ultra present.
We were talking about Jimi Hendrix last night, and one of the things that only has occurred to me really just now was that if you go back to the original Jimi Hendrix songs and think about how much each one of those guys were playing, the drums was this wild kind of jazz all over the place.
Mitch Mitchell.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And the bass parts were active, and of course then you had Jimi Hendrix. you know, that really, I think, would have only worked in a trio. What would the fourth guy have done? You know, this is, I don't mean to be arrogant in saying, oh, we're like Jimi Hendrix, but that is really the, if you could think about it, the kind of archetype for rock instrumental trio, and how much freedom each one of those people could have in the band. And
I guess Cream.
yeah, another one, yeah.
There were a few of those. I remember my father, he always says that there's like trios. When I was a kid, he already said like trios are pretty much, you know, my favorite kind of concept of rock or bands, you know, and obviously there was like Motorhead, you know, there's ZZ Top, there's Rush, you know, and they sound like a fucking orchestra as a trio even, you know, and then, you know, the bands that you guys mentioned, you know? So it's there's something about it.
Power of three.
Yeah.
It's not an immediate priority. Maybe one day.
We do encourage him. This is we're always trying to foster the thing where we can do our own thing and then also do the Aristocrats.
Well, you know, may add to that briefly. The more we build our fan base actually with the Aristocrats, and the more we kind of have a legacy, the more it feels like writing for a solo album as well. There, you know, it feels like, you know, I sometimes have the thought like, shit, I don't need to kind of bother making a new solo album immediately, because what we also bring in for the band reaches a wider audience, and we would have written the same thing maybe for us. So if it makes sense a little bit what I'm saying.
We're just touring all the way into next year, you know, it's you know, we've got a lot of Europe to go. We're still going to go to Asia, and we're still trying to figure out a way to get to South America as well. I mean, you know, the calendar stretches out far and wide, so that's our future right now, is looking at that.
We haven't finished our present plans.